Morning, this is Ben. Responding to Zom Gets Chris. Sorry, the name threw me off a little bit. But anyway, questions. These questions are directed primarily to the followers of the God of Abraham. The first question was, would you be able to enjoy heaven knowing that people you love are tormented in hell? And to respond to that question, I wanted to ask a question of my own. What is the source of enjoyment? Where does enjoyment, because we're talking about whether or not we can enjoy heaven, we have to know where enjoyment, what is the source of enjoyment? What is the basis of enjoyment? What causes true enjoyment? What really possesses value in the universe? What is fundamentally valuable? And I'll just leave it with that on that one. I won't go into any more detail. Maybe if someone calls for me to, I'd be happy to, but just as a starter, I'll just stop there. Second question, how come so many times the all-knowing God doesn't seem to have a clue what's going to happen? And to respond to that question, I think the best way to respond is with a question. Are all tests a pursuit of knowledge? And the ironic thing is that this video was full of questions that weren't really a pursuit of knowledge. She wasn't all that concerned about, finding out the truth, more as asking questions to help us understand things. And so I do the same thing. I respond by asking a question, are all tests a pursuit of knowledge? To help, my listeners understand. And I think, the same could be true of God. It's to help us understand ourselves more than it is for Him to understand us. I mean, we do it all the time. We're doing it in this video. Next one, how do you justify God punishing Adam and Eve for something they did before having any knowledge about good and evil? And she followed up, because God did tell them not to eat the fruit. That's what she's talking about. But it says they didn't know good and evil. And she says, even if God told them what to do, how could they be held accountable before they had any basic understanding of right and wrong? And again, there's a missing question that needs to be asked before we can address her question. Is what is a basic understanding of right and wrong? I don't see how you can get a more basic, more fundamental understanding of right and wrong than God said not to do this. I mean, in the Christian mindset, that's where right and wrong ultimately stems from who God is. And so if God says do something, there is no right and wrong beyond that. And with kids, they're that way with their parents. They don't have an understanding of right and wrong outside of their parents told them to do this. They either did what they're told or they were bad. That's the way they see it. And fundamentally, when you go back, when you get outside of that, ultimately right and wrong still has to come from somebody, because it can't be based on what is. It has to be based on what should be, on what could be. And that can never be based on what already is. It has to be based on some idea about what ought to be when two things could be. And you say, well, it's this one instead of that one. So it has to come from somebody, and an ultimate somebody, if it's really an ultimate right and wrong. What will happen in the afterlife to the people who never heard about your religion, And this question, there's another question that needs to be asked before you can get to this question that we don't need to skip. And do people not hear about your religion or my religion or Fred's religion or something like that? We have to understand that these religions aren't as simple and particular as we make them out to be. They're complete worldviews. They're not such little things. And I'm not the first person to notice this. We'll go to Acts 17, and here Paul says, in verse 26, he says, and He will be God, has made from one blood every nation, in other words, one man, every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings, so that they should seek the Lord in the hope that they might grope for Him and find Him, though He is not far from each one of us. And the simple point is that with the Christian religion, there's a lot of details. There's like this story we're reading about Paul. You don't have to necessarily believe every little detail to be a Christian. there's a fundamental story that you believe to be a Christian. It starts with God and who He is and His authority and His goodness and His power. And second is man and how all the people in the universe are evil and bad. And then and by the way, every religion teaches that. Then you've got the solution to the problem of guilt, which is, in the Christian religion, is Jesus dying on the cross for your sins, bearing the punishment for you, and then you just either receive that or reject that in belief or disbelief. And that's not one indivisible fact of information. If you don't believe that God's good, then man bad, the second part is not going to be so powerful. Or if you don't believe in God good, you may believe in God good, but maybe you don't believe man bad, then there's no point in Jesus saves and the solution to the problem of guilt. And so even if everyone doesn't hear about Jesus saves, they've still got a fundamental question to answer about goodness and where does it come from, and does it come from God. And with the Bible and all that, there's just a basic idea that we don't deserve, at the very least, the badness of man is probably the most obvious fact of the universe. And so if people want to accept their guilt and admit it, where can you go from there? And then the existence of God is a fundamental question everyone's asking. Is there an ultimate authority in the universe? Can we really deny that people aren't at least asking that? But how do we approach that question? Those two questions. Do we approach them honestly? If we're not willing to be honest about them, we're never gonna be honest about Jesus saves. So yeah. Okay. The last question: how do you justify an infinite punishment for finite crime? And again, there are other questions that got skipped on the way to this question that I want to bring up. First, there are two questions here. First, shouldn't a person be able to control his or her eternal destiny? I'll leave it with that. Just say it again. Should not a person be able to control his or her eternal destiny? And the second question, I think we need to enter into the concept of hell. Do we become worse people in hell based on prior commitments? In other words, is hell really the result of a punishment that results from your choice in life, or is there more to it than that? In other words, do you commit yourself to hell and then become worse and worse and worse forever? And ultimately, the question we have to ask is, that first question, if a person, shouldn't a person be able to control their eternal destiny? I mean, what are we going to say here? We have to understand, and this kind of gets back to the first question, what makes heaven so great? Is it, all the money and all the wonderful things God gives us? We have this assumption that the things God created are fundamentally more valuable than the God who created them, and that doesn't make any sense. The ultimate object of value and source of enjoyment in the universe is God Himself, and so that's what makes heaven enjoyable. It's the presence of God. And if someone rejects God and doesn't want to have anything to do with God and makes that commitment, then what are they doing in heaven? And why would they want to go to heaven? And why would they even if they went to heaven, if they fundamentally hated God, they would fundamentally hate heaven, and it would be hell and torment to them. So in a sense, everyone could go to the same place, and because they have different attitudes about it, one could be in hell and one could be in heaven. So I won't say any more. Yeah. Bye-bye.